One of my followers on Instagram named Jenna, who is LoomGirl52, has requested that I make her a tutorial for the Detroit Red Wings. And without further ado, we'll get started. As with all the NHL players, we are going to need a standard rainbow loom in the aligned configuration, where the pins all line up with each other. And the bands we're going to be using are red, clear, skin tone, white, black, and silver for the skate blades. And as always, we're going to start with the attachments, and everything will be double banded. And for the arms, we are going to need red, black, and white. And we're going to start at the top on the right side pin, and we're going to place 2 red bands from the first to the second, 2 red bands from the second to the third, 2 red bands from the third to the fourth, and 2 red bands from the fourth to the fifth. We're going to follow that with 3 black bands for the glove, and we're going to cap this with a single black band wrapped 3 times around the peg. We're going to do the same thing on the other side, again making a 4-link chain of 2 red bands each, starting at the top peg on the left. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4, followed by 3 black bands for the hockey glove, and again capped with a single black band wrapped 3 times around the peg. And before we start looping, we're going to grab a single white band and wrap it 4 times around our hook, and we are going to loop just the black and the first red. So we want to reach inside our cap band, grabbing the 3 bands we've used for our glove and looping them forward in a raindrop shape. Next, we want to reach in and grab the next 2 red bands and loop them forward. And the next 2 red bands we grab, we want to slide all 4 loops of our white band down onto the red before we loop it forward to the peg above. We're going to continue and finish off this side by looping our last 2 red sets of bands, and that's our first arm. Again, for the second arm, we are going to take a single white band and wrap it 4 times around our hook. Reaching inside our cap band, we want to grab the bottom 3 black bands and loop forward, making sure we form our raindrop shape. And once again, we're going to loop our first set of red bands, and on our second set of red bands, we want to slide all 4 loops of our white band onto the red before we loop it forward to the peg above. And we can continue looping our last sets of red, and that will give us both arms. And we can remove this from the loom. Carefully take these off the pegs. And before we set these aside, I want to take another crochet hook, and I have one here with a fine tip, and I'm just going to grab 2 of the white loops, and I'm going to give them a little stretch and tuck the glove through the center and pull these white bands over to the other side of his arm, and that will give us 2 white loops on either side, to represent the stripes of his jersey. There, I'll move my hand out of the way so you can see. And we're going to do the same thing for the other arm. Again, grabbing just 2 of the white bands, or white loops. There's only 1 band there. And we're going to stretch it a little bit and tuck our glove through the center, stretching the white bands over to the other side of his arm. And we'll just spread them out. There we go. And now we can set this aside. And we're going to move on to our next attachment, which are the legs. And again, we'll be using red and white bands. And this time, we will also need our silver bands for the skate blades. And we're going to start again with red bands. So we're going to place 2 red bands 2 times going down the right side. And we're going to follow that with 2 white bands, and then 2 red bands. And we want to place 2 silver bands continuing down the right side, which we will cap with a single black band wrapped 3 times around the peg. And we're going to do the same thing for the other side, again starting with 2 red bands going 2 times down the left side, followed by 2 white bands continuing down the left side, and 2 red bands after the white. Next, we want to place our 2 silver bands, and again we will cap this with a single black band wrapped 3 times around the peg. And this time we don't have any stripes to add, so we're just going to reach inside and grab our bottom 2 silver and loop them forward, followed by the red and the white, and making sure that we're forming our raindrop shapes as we go. We're going to loop our last 2 sets of red to finish off this one leg. Moving over to the other side, reaching inside our cap band, grabbing the bottom 2 silver and looping forward, again with the red and the white, making sure that we're grabbing both bands and that we're forming a raindrop shape as we loop to the peg above. And that will give us our legs, and we can set these aside as well. So I'm just going to carefully remove this from the loom. And we can set this aside. And now we're ready to band our loom. And we're going to start at the top with our red bands for his helmet. And we are going to place 2 red bands from the first to the second peg going down the center. Next, we will place 2 red bands from the second peg on the left to the first peg in the center, and the second peg on the right to the first peg in the center. Next, we need to place 2 red bands on each peg on the left, right, and center. So 2 red bands from the second to the third peg on the left, 2 red bands from the second to the third in the center, and 2 red bands from the second to the third on the right. We want to move down to his visor, and for that we're using clear bands, and we're going to place 2 clear bands from the third to the fourth peg on the left, 2 clear bands from the third to the fourth peg in the center, and 2 clear bands from the third to the fourth peg on the right. And we're ready to move down to his chin and the lower part of his face. And for that we're using skin tone bands. And we're going to place 2 skin tone bands from the fourth to the fifth peg in the center, followed by 3 white bands for the neck protector, continuing down the center. And we'll go back to the skin tone bands and place 2 skin tone bands from the 5th peg in the center to the 4th peg on the left, and 2 skin tone bands from the 5th peg in the center to the 4th peg on the right. And we can continue down with his jersey. The rest of this will be done with red bands. So we're going to place 2 red bands going down the center, and 2 red bands from the 7th peg on the left to the 6th peg in the center, and 2 red bands from the 7th peg on the right to the 6th peg in the center. Continuing down the center, we want to place 2 red bands 5 times going down the center. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we can move over to the left side, and we are going to go down the left side 6 times, finishing off the left side pin. Again with 2 red bands each time, from the 7th to the 8th peg, the 8th to the 9th, the 9th to the 10th, the 10th to the 11th, the 11th to the 12th, and the 12th to the 13th peg on the left side. We're going to do the same thing on the right and finish off the right side pin with 2 red bands each time. Again, we're going to go down 6 times with 2 red bands each time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And to finish off the shorts, the hockey pants, we are going to take 2 red bands from the last peg on the left to the 2nd peg from the bottom in the center, and 2 red bands from the last peg on the right to the 2nd peg from the bottom in the center. Now we're ready for our attachments, and we're going to start with our legs, and these are the ones with the silver bands representing the skates, and one is going to go on the last peg down on the left, and the other will go on the last peg on the right. Okay, and the arms will be attached to the 7th peg from the top, or where our shoulders start for our jersey. So we're going to place 1 on the left side, again at the 7th peg from the top, and 1 arm will go on the right side at the 7th peg from the top. There we go. And now we need our holding bands, and we're going to start at the top with the helmet, and we're going to place a single red band across the 2nd pin on the left, the center, and on the right. Moving down, we are going to place a clear band across the 3rd row of pegs on the left, the right, and in the center, and another clear band across the 4th row on the left, the right, and in the center. Moving down to the jersey, we want to place a single red band across the, first we'll push our bands down, and we are going to place a single red band across the 8th pegs on the left, the right, and in the center, across the 9th pegs on the left, the right, and in the center, across the 10th pegs on the left, the right, and in the center. We want to place a single red band around the 11th pegs on the left, the right, and in the center, and a single red band across the 12th pegs on the left, the right, and in the center. We also want to place 2 white bands on top of the 10th pegs, right on top of our red holding band. I want to make sure that they're separated and that our 2 white bands stay on the top. And now we can begin looping, and we're going to start on the left side, and reaching inside our attachment, we're going to grab the top 2 red bands and loop them over to the center. And we'll do the same thing on the right side, again reaching inside our attachment and grabbing the top 2 red bands and looping them to the center. We're going to start on the left side, and we're only going to loop up the first 2. So we're going to reach inside, grabbing the bottom 2 red bands and looping forward, and again the bottom 2 red bands and looping forward. We're going to move on to the right and grab the bottom 2 red again and loop forward, and staying inside the holding bands, grabbing the bottom 2 red and forming our raindrop shape as we go. Next, we can move into the center, and staying inside all of our bands, we want to grab the bottom 2 red and loop them forward. Continuing on with the center, we're going to reach inside and grab the bottom 2 red and loop them forward. And we want to do the same thing on the left and the same thing on the right. And before we continue on, we want to grab just the top 2 white bands from above the 10th peg, and we're just going to pull them down onto the red bands below, making sure they're not twisted. And then we can continue on looping, and we're going to start at the left side, and we will loop all the way up to the neck. So we're going to reach inside, grabbing the bottom 2 bands and looping forward in a raindrop shape. We want to make sure that we stay inside our holding bands and that we're grabbing the bottom 2 bands only as we loop forward to the peg above. And our last 2, and we're going to loop up the right side now, again staying inside the holding band, grabbing the bottom 2 red bands and looping forward to the peg above. Again, making sure that we're grabbing just the bottom 2 red bands and that we're forming our raindrop shape. And now we can continue up the center, again reaching in and grabbing the bottom 2 red and looping forward. And we will just finish off these last 4 links of red. And when we get to the neck, we need to remember that we have used 3 bands here for the neck protector. So we want to make sure that we reach inside and grab all 3 white bands and loop them forward. And I'm just going to loosen the tension by rolling my hook. And by doing that, I can see that I missed one of the white bands. So I'm going to go in and loop it forward. And again, I'll just loosen the tension. And now we can move on to the head, and I'm going to reach in and grab the top 2 skin tone and loop them to the right. And the next 2 skin tone will go over to the left. And we're going to continue up the left side, going all the way to the top center pin by looping the 2 clear, followed by 2 red. And again, I'm staying inside the holding bands and the last 2 red and forming my raindrop shape. And I'm going to loop up the right side, again staying inside the holding band, grabbing the bottom 2 bands and looping them forward in a raindrop shape. And now we can continue up the center, and we're going to reach in and grab the bottom 2 skin tone, again staying inside our holding band, grabbing the next 2 clear, and finishing off by looping our final 2 sets of red bands. And what we want to do now is double check that we have looped everything and that nothing got forgotten or missed. You want to make sure that you have pulled down your white bands onto these red, and we'll just check down through the side, because this is a good way to tell whether or not you've missed any bands, is looking at an angle through your loom. And everything looks good, so we're going to attach a slip knot, and I'm going to do that by reaching my hook down through the center of all of these bands at the top center peg. I'm going to grab a hold of the end of my red band and pull it through and form my slip knot by pulling one end through the other. And before I tighten that too much, I'm just going to loosen some of the tension on this peg, and then I'll give it a gentle tug. And now we're ready to remove this from the loom, and I'm just going to release these bottom bands, and then I'm going to use my hook and just carefully pry them off the pegs. And we always want to start at the bottom so that we don't stretch our characters too much. And as I've said in previous tutorials, there is a purpose for stretching your bands, and I find it very useful when you're making bracelets. It is helpful to have your bands stretched a little bit for something that might have to go around something, or if you happen to want your design stretched. But generally for the most part on characters, unless of course maybe you're making Stretch Armstrong, you probably don't want your bands to be stretched too much out of shape. So, and you may have noticed in a couple of spots I've placed my hook down through the center of the peg and just rolled it around that peg to release the bands. And this will give us our Detroit player. And what we're going to do is we're going to start at his feet and do a little bit of tweaking. And I want to make sure that his feet and skates are defined a little better. So I'm just going to place my hook down through the center of the silver bands and give the bands a little tug to the side. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other foot. Place my hook straight down through the center and give the bands a little tug. And that's going to not only define my feet a little bit, but it will also ensure that my skate blades will actually be the thing touching the ice. So moving up, I want to define his arms a little better, and I'm going to reach my hook down through the center of the teardrop at his shoulder and just give the bands a little tug. And that will angle them down a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, again placing my hook down through the center of those bands and just giving them a little tug. I'm just going to rework this one again through the center and giving a tug. I think I must have tugged that the opposite way because I just put that arm back where it was. Next, I just want to stretch his head out a little bit, make it a little wider, and so the helmet will sit properly. And these white stripes represent the stripes on his jersey, and you want to make sure that for your arms they're not crossed over each other, and this one doesn't look like it's very even. So I'm just going to take my hook and place it into these two loops, if I can get at them. And I'm just going to give them a little tug to try to even them up a little bit. And we also want to make sure that they're not crossed over. As I've said in other videos, I kind of like to try to make sure that the cross part is in the center of my arm so that it's not interfering with the look of the stripes on the jersey. And the last thing we need to do is secure the slip knot at his head. Just going to adjust this. And if you find, like I have, that your holding band at the top is just a little bit loose, I don't know. I haven't tried with a 1.5 looped holding band. That may work, but I find that a double looped holding band is just too much. But if you, like I did, have just a little too loose of a holding band there in that section, just stretch your bands so that it kind of gathers that loose band up, and everything should be fine. So we want to secure our slip knot in the back, and I'm just going to weave my hook through a few bands at the back, grab the end of my slip knot loop and pull it down and pull it through. And the purpose of this is just to secure that slip knot out of the way and out of sight. Now, if you were giving this to a child to play with, you may want to secure that with a C-clip so that the character doesn't fall apart. And there you have it, Jenna. This is your Detroit Red Wing player from the NHL. I hope you like it. Please comment below, and I would love to see your version if you make one from this tutorial. And also, give me another suggestion. What's your second favorite team? Anybody can tell me what their team favorites are, and I will try to design the characters for those. I will be making my way through all 30 NHL teams, and I have been known to make a couple of OHL as well. And also, if your child plays hockey, send me a picture of them in their uniform and I can design a character for you. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I have a lot more tutorials coming up. I've got all my collections to continue working on and to finish up. And I know I've got lots more coming down the pipe as well. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time.